3,000 plus employees, 9 world-class manufacturing sites. Research-driven company with complex R&D capabilities. More than 500 qualified scientists, 13 chirally pure molecules, 5 biosimilar. First in India innovative products. Emcure's mRNA vaccine phase 1 trials have started with funding from Department of Biotechnology, Government of India. Emcure Corporate Initiatives. M Gurukul, India's first mentor-mentee program for doctors. Uncondition Yourself, first-of-a-kind revolutionary talk show on women's health. M Vidya, a knowledge enhancement series for nurses and paramedics, in collaboration with Symbiosis College of Nursing, with 12,000 plus paramedics across 3,500 plus nursing homes. M Diva, Emcure in association with RSSDI aims to promise better women healthcare in India. AnemiaFreeIndia.com, an initiative of FOGSI and Emcure to spread awareness about anemia in India. Stroke Care App, an app towards stroke awareness for patients. BreastfeedingIsGood.com, an Emcure initiative to promote breastfeeding awareness in India. At Emcure, science wins.
When was the last time you heard women openly talk about their mental and physical health? Menstrual disorder, diabetes, pregnancy and breastfeeding, depression, cancer, infertility and safe abortion? Don't remember? Well, that's because the stigma attached to such conditions has forced women to bear the pain in silence. Dismal statistics on women's health need to change. A difference cannot be made until they voice their opinions, put forth their stories, and together bring about a healthy change. Presenting Uncondition Yourself, India's first of its kind revolutionary talk show dedicated to women's health. A platform where we talk about their health issues and breaking taboos. Catch Namita Thapar in conversation with leading doctors and patients, sharing candid stories. It's time to speak up. Together we can raise awareness and create an impact. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for more such videos related to women's health.
So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to day 4th of FOGSI webinar series on COVID-19 and women's healthcare. And today's session is exclusively dedicated to infertility, IVF, and COVID-19. And at the outset, I congratulate and thank our FOGSI President, Dr. Alpesh Gandhi, and Secretary General, Dr. Jaideep Tak, for organizing such a wonderful and important webinar series at the time when we really need to learn so many new things regarding COVID-19 in context with different situations and problems related to women's health. And can you please give us a program here? And this is today's program, which you can see on the screen. And we are having our chairpersons and speakers ready with us. So let us begin with our today's session. And yeah, so I would like to introduce our today's one of the chairpersons, Dr. Duru Shah Madam. Dr. Duru Shah is a veteran gynecologist and renowned fertility specialist from Mumbai, and she is having an inspiring journey as an obstetrician and gynecologist marked with countless academic milestones and global recognitions. She is the director of Gynet World, the Center for Women's Health and Fertility, and consultant gynecologist at Britt Kennedy and Jaslok Hospital. And she is the past president of our leading national organizations like FOGSI, ISAR, and IMS, and currently the founder president of the PCOS Society. She chairs various international special interest groups like ASPIRE and ASRM. And she has been proud recipient of many awards and felicitations, and has been the first and the only Indian to be honored with the most prestigious FIGO Distinguished Merit Award for service towards women's health. Being a prolific writer and editor. She has authored over 200 chapters and articles in national and international textbooks and edited and co-edited more than 20 books in the field of gynecology and obstetrics. We are honored to have you as our esteemed chairperson of today's session, madam. And now I request Dr. Aruna to introduce our another star chairperson, Dr. Rishma Pai, madam.
Thank you, Dr. Rupal Shah. I am delighted. I am privileged to introduce Dr. Rishma Pai, madam, who is very dynamic, very inspirational to all of us. This is President, Mumbai Obstetrics and Gynecological Society 2020 and 2021, President, FIGO, Federation of Obstetrics and Gynecological Societies of India 2017, President, Indian Society for Assisted Reproduction 2018 and 2019, President, Indian Association of Gynecological Endoscopists 2018 and 2019, Assistant Treasurer, International Federation of Fertility Societies, Consultant Gynecologist, Leelavati Hospital, Jaslok and Hinduja Healthcare Hospitals, Mumbai. Fellowship and Undam of Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, London. Welcome, ma'am, and please take over and conduct the session.
Thank you. Can we stop the slideshow? Thank you. Good evening. Good evening to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us today for this extremely important session in an even more important series on COVID-19 pandemic. I think each one of us, the only thing we talk about is COVID. And either we are happy at some moments when we hear some good news, or we are miserable, or we are anxious, or we are depressed, we have hope, we have despair. I think these are the emotions all of us are going through at various times of the day or week or month. The only thing I think that is common that we all believe in is that the one weapon with which we can fight COVID-19 is knowledge. I think knowledge is the only thing, how the disease spreads, how we can prevent it from spreading, what is the information we need to treat patients, what are the latest updates, how about the vaccines, who and when can we take those vaccines. So I think knowledge and information is the only thing which is going to help us come on the other side of this terrible pandemic. So I'm very, very happy to be sharing this stage today with Dr. Durusha, who all of you know is a leading infertility expert and of course, very, very experienced in all aspects of medicine. So let me start by requesting Dr. Durusha to say a few words, and then we can go on with the speakers.
Thank you very much, Rishma, for this very nice introduction. And thank you, Dr. Alpesh Gandhi and Jaideep Tank as President and Secretary General of FOGSI for having invited me and for also organizing this entire meeting of a whole week. We know that COVID has created havoc all over the world. And we know that the treatment for infertility has got affected everywhere. Various organizations like the SRM, ESHRE, FIGO, so many, CDC, WHO, everyone's put up guidelines, including FOGSI, wherein, every day everything changes. And that's because it's such a new infection that we follow the guidelines as and when they come. And there will be a difference of opinion between the different speakers probably, and each one will have their own experience to add. I think that's a very good way to proceed so that people know the way forward and how we can go about it. And I think we should go ahead with the program and listen to the speakers who have done put in a lot of effort, I think, to gather all the evidence together. And I'm sure at the end of it, we will be wiser and we will know what next to do. So I think I'll ask Rishma to introduce the first speaker and then we can go ahead.
Thank you. My pleasure to introduce my dear friend, Dr. Kundan Ingle. All of us know him as the chairperson of the Infertility Committee of FOXI at present. He's been extremely active in this field, doing lots and lots of programs across the country focused on infertility, and now, of course, infertility and its problems and associations with COVID-19. He's also the General Secretary of the Pune OBGYN Society 1920. He has the fellowship of the ICOG. He's the founder treasurer of the Maharashtra chapter of ISAR, and I know very, very active in Maharashtra chapter of ISAR even now. He's a founder member and clinical secretary of the Pune Association of Gynec Endoscopic Surgeons, a clinical secretary POGS. He's remained the treasurer there as well. He's published a lot of original research work on fresh versus frozen embryo transfer and many such infertility related issues. Many awards obviously he has won because of his commitment to the subject of infertility. So I think he's absolutely the right person for the topic today. That's on really how to counsel infertile couples in relation to their treatment in this COVID pandemic, and of course when and how the vaccinations should be taken. So over to you, Dr. Kundan Ingle, for a very, very important subject to be discussed.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can hear me. It's a wonderful evening, though the surroundings are not good around in Pune from where I'm speaking. But at the outset, thank you, Dr. Alpesh Gandhi, President FOXI, for giving me this chance to speak on counseling of infertility couple. And
sorry, Dr. Ingle, you're a little soft. Is there some way you can turn up your volume?
Sure. So can you hear me now clearly? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, but it's soft.
Okay. All right. So at the outset, thanks to Dr. Alpesh Gandhi for giving me this chance to speak in front of all this intelligent crowd, and respected chairperson, Dr. Durusha.
Dr. Kundan, you have to increase your volume.
I am with
the audio settings.
Okay. Full volume. You can't hear me very clearly, or should I speak a little loudly now? Is that okay?
Yeah, a little louder is okay.
Yeah, fine. Thank you. And respected chairperson, thank you for those kind words of introduction. And today my job is to speak on counseling of infertility couple in COVID time. So friends, as we know, it is very difficult time we are going through, but we understand this real facts that we don't grow when the things are easy, but we grow when we face challenges. And this is also true in a lot of sense that difficult roads often leads us to a beautiful destination, and that is where we keep organizing these seminars, these webinars, and because of which we update ourselves in a knowledge so that we offer a good practice guidelines to our patients through our society guidelines as well as our own understanding of the subject. So since last year, this is what we are doing in ART practice is we identify patients according to the triage questionnaire, where a patient category 1, which is a patient who is asymptomatic, triage negative, then we include those patients into our practice and we continue offering them the routine services. But the second category patients where we suspect them, probably they may have a COVID-19 infection with maybe some mild or non-specific symptoms, or probably they do have some positive triage questionnaire. Then we proceed for the testing, and if kind of the testing is negative, then we little go ahead with open-minded and offer them the routine advices. But the in third category where we find the patient with a specific symptoms which are related to COVID-19 and a previous or probably recent COVID test positive status, then we subject them for a scenario 3 category patients, and we ask them to, we don't, in fact, we postpone their ART treatments for some while. So these are the scenarios which we, probably plan, but we need to understand that when it comes to oocyte retrieval, especially.
Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Kundan.
Sorry. Yeah.
Please come closer to the mic. Please come closer to the mic, please. Yeah.
I'm so low. All right. Okay. Can you hear me now clearly?
Yes, it's better. Thank you.
It's better. Okay, fine. So in scenario when it comes to oocyte retrieval in ART, I think we have to follow the standard procedures unless there are some changes occur between the trigger and the oocyte retrieval, maybe some test comes positive before before the oocyte retrieval, then probably we might have to deviate from our advices, where we probably even go for frozen embryo transfer cycle or freeze all the embryos. In scenario 2, when if the positive retriage is there, then we can go ahead with the testing, and based on that we decide to either continue or to discontinue the ovarian stimulation and IVF cycles. Then it comes to scenario 3. If the patient tests positive before ovulation trigger or even embryo thawing, postpone the treatment, or you refer to the center where positive patients are handled, and you can isolate them after the procedure. So patients which are high risk of for ovarian hyperstimulation, we have to counsel them that oocyte retrieval could be performed, and followed by we need to do a unit sanitization with a universal guidelines. But if there is a potential SARS positive patient, we must continue treatment, especially for those patients who are specifically categorized like oncology patients or patients who are at the high risk of ovarian high stimulation. And we must follow certain following measures for the prevention of transmission to the other staffs, like wearing a mask, gowning and disinfection of the operation theater, transfer room and IVF laboratory after the procedure. So when it comes to embryology lab, we have certain guidelines where we do routine good laboratory practices. We wear mask and gloves. Extra care should be taken to reduce the exposure to the native follicular fluid and the sperms by dilution, and safe disposal of fluids in individually closed containers as quickly as possible. Then there are published guidelines and good laboratory practice guidelines which we follow in the laboratory so that we avoid transmission to the embryologist. And should a patient become suspect or positive for COVID-19 during embryo culture, then do not proceed for embryo transfer and go for a freeze-all policy. That should be the adaptive strategy. Now, when it comes to embryo transfer, we have to explain our patient that there is going to be certain restriction on them. So restrict the access for the accompanying person. Perform the transfer only in cases of low risk or asymptomatic patients and partners. And preferably you apply, as I said in the previous slide, that freeze all policy in case the patient turns out to be positive before embryo transfer. Cryopreservation, I think we need those high security straws before we do cryopreserve the embryos or the oocytes, or even we can take a help of vapor phase storage tank specifically for the COVID-19 positive patients. So these certain points has to be counseled prior to the initiation of the ART treatment. But while counseling, we have to keep certain things in mind, and we must tell our patients regarding this, that what we know about pregnancy in COVID-19. So remember, full-term newborns delivered from mothers who are having active COVID-19 infection, they have actually done pretty well. And this was by Dr. Shali's study in 2020. But also the severe illness, including COVID-19, they may precipitate premature labor, and we might have to face that neonatal complications of prematurity. And a case series by Dr. Chen in 2020 of 9 women which were affected with COVID-19 that delivered via cesarean section, they did show that there are no viral RNA in the amniotic fluid or even in a cord blood or breast milk. So we have certain evidence which we know about COVID impact in the pregnancy. But certain things what we don't know is what impact COVID-19 does in pregnancy is that we don't have a data yet which exists regarding the impact of infection on the fetus, especially during the first and the second trimester of pregnancy. Then adverse perinatal outcomes are unclear whether these outcomes are directly related to COVID-19. And we have certain evidence where evidence of vertical transmission of COVID is still unclear and probably just a possibility. The outcome of 217 neonates born to mothers with positive status demonstrated no strong evidence for vertical transmission when delivery was done via cesarean section. So with this background today, what we have to understand is that what is the status of COVID vaccination during or even before pregnancy. That is what we are looking at. So ASRM gave us a guidelines in December, then ASHRAE published a guidelines in 2021 February, and they said that a woman group who want to plan for a pregnancy or who are not yet pregnant, we have two advices or two options for them. One option is that you wait for pregnancy occurrence for some time, so you defer pregnancy until steps to effectively mitigate the risk of pandemic have been undertaken, especially in cases where in areas where ineffective control of the pandemic is there, or maybe those countries who are having poor control on the disease spread and limited current resources for vaccination. So this will pose the least risk because probably pregnancy state is itself is makes her prone for infection, and but may not be the best option for women with a shorter reproductive horizon. So you have to keep these things in mind, that which option should be offered to which group of patients. Option 2 is we can proceed with efforts at conception, that is she can plan natural try or she can undergo ART, but she has to continue with all those universal precautions, we call it as mitigation measures, and seek COVID-19 vaccination as soon as possible. So here, if the patient decides the potential benefits of proceeding for vaccination, which is actually outweighing the COVID-19 infection risk, which is cited for her current time and place, then I think this is something which can be offered. Now, same group, again, European group said about when it comes to assisted reproduction, the data during pregnancy are actually very limited. So with no data on breastfeeding especially. So as a result, this group, they can make no recommendation initially on whether men and women who are attempting to get pregnant through ART should receive the vaccine before starting the treatment. For women with comorbidities, which are supposed to be very high risk for COVID-19 infection, and of course, followed by pregnancy complications because of these comorbidities, then consideration should be given to encourage vaccination for this group of patients. So we have to identify women with a high risk comorbidities, and we must counsel them to go ahead with vaccination. Now, ESHRE recommends that men and women living in countries where the vaccine is not available or choosing not to be vaccinated should not be prevented from access to ART, because finally, the precautions which we are supposed to take before ART, offering ART, is not available. So we should not restrict them for not allowing them to undergo ART. Now, the cautious approach is to postpone the start of the ART treatment for up to 2 months after the vaccination. And that is what is a gray zone area where what should we do? Then came on 2nd March 2021, the FIGO statement about vaccination for pregnant and breastfeeding women. So what these guidelines gave us some idea that pregnant women who by definition considered at high risk for severe infection, but at disadvantage due to limited vaccine access. So if we don't give, then they are the group patients who are in fact high risk group. So in fact, vaccination should be promoted for the high risk patients, like the healthcare patients. Pregnant women who agree to be vaccinated should be advised to complete their 2-dose series with the same vaccine product. Okay. And pregnant women who decline vaccination against COVID-19 should be supported in their decision and should be updated with the new evidence when it comes available. So these were the FIGO statements. Also, FIGO commented that women planning their pregnancy can take the COVID-19 vaccine if they choose to do so. Okay. And routine testing for pregnancy before vaccination is not at all recommended. And women who are trying to become pregnant do not need to postpone pregnancy after receiving a COVID-19 vaccine. So these were the recent guidelines, needs to be understood, and that is how we have to advise our patients. That is what is the expectations from the healthcare societies who prepares the guidelines. Now, about vaccine administration for breastfeeding women, what information we have and what the FIGO statement says that though we know that breastfeeding itself offers many health benefits to the mother as well as newborn, and giving these vaccines are believed to pose minimal to no potential risk to the newborns through breast milk. So based on previously administered vaccines, there is the potential for direct neonatal benefits if the vaccine stimulated immunoglobulins A, especially, they prove to pass through the breast milk. So that is what we are looking at, that do we get these kind of immunoglobulins which are going to offer a benefit to the neonates. And for breastfeeding women, therefore, the COVID-19 vaccine can be offered. So that was the statement. Now, FOXI, our own society, came out with our own statement that what should we do, looking at all the evidence as well as looking at the current scenario in India, since last couple of months. So what statement says that if we look at, we compare with the non-pregnant women and the pregnant women who are not infected with COVID-19, the pregnant women who are infected with COVID are more likely to need hospitalization, they need critical care and mortality, because this scenario is in the present year, which was less in the last year. And I think that is what we have to understand. Last year, our guidelines were different, but now if we look at our pregnant patients, they are landing up in a hospital where even they are going onto ventilators, where we have taken certain decisions of even termination of pregnancy to avoid the extra load on their body. And in addition to general preventive measures, the COVID vaccine is thought to be definitive tool to slow down or halt this pandemic. Let us understand those different types of vaccines. So the most common which is available in India is a whole virus vaccine, which is killed, and that is why that virus is passed through the cell lines and they are replicated. The genetic material is inactivated and this injected into the host to induce immunity. The second one, which is whole virus vaccine, which is live and attenuated, but this is not marketed. This has got a direct transmission to the fetus if the pregnant woman is immunized, but this is not definitely is available anywhere in the world. The third, which is protein subunit vaccine, a subunit of virus particle that has potential to generate immunity, is isolated and it is injected, and that induces the antibodies which can destroy pathogenic viral particles, but it only induces the beta cell immunity, doesn't give us the overall immune response. So that's a third type of vaccine. The fourth is, which is again commonly available in India, is a viral vector vaccine, where a harmless adenovirus is used to deliver this genetic material from the COVID-19 virus into the host and induce the immunity. But of course, it requires a booster dose. And we know that adenovirus transmission to the fetus from a mother, it can occur, but this purely possesses theoretical risk, as pathogenicity is absolutely negligible. And that is why Covishield is considered to be very safe to be administered for a pregnant patient. Fourth, which is another very good vaccine, is a nucleic acid vaccine, which is by Moderna or Pfizer. The COVID-19 virus mRNA is isolated and replicated. It is injected into the host, and this induces immunity by generation of antibodies. And no other vaccine of this type have been used in humans. Requires ultra cold chain for transport. That is what is required. And we have maximum data, especially used in pregnancy, related to this vaccine. So Fox's statement concluded that based on the mechanism of the available COVID vaccine, there is no obvious basis for excluding pregnant or lactating women from vaccination, especially India, where we are using a Covishield and Covaxin vaccines. So this was a study in 2021, where 31 reproductive age vaccine recipients, out of them 84 were pregnant, 31 were lactating, and 16 were non-pregnant in a prospective score study, where vaccine-induced antibody titers were equivalent in a pregnant as well as lactating compared with the non-pregnant women, and all titers were significantly higher than those induced by SARS infection during pregnancy. So vaccine gives a much better protection than actually infection exposure. Vaccine-generated antibodies were present in all umbilical cord blood and even the breast milk samples. And also they noted that neutralizing antibody titers were lower, but significantly lower in an umbilical cord compared to maternal sera. So this study concluded that COVID-19 mRNA vaccines generated robust humoral immunity in pregnant and lactating women with immunogenicity and reactogenicity similar to that observed in non-pregnant women. So immune transfer to neonates occurred via placenta as well as breast milk. So in fact, it is beneficial, and that is why Foxy promotes, and we recommend now that a vaccination should be offered. So there are some few facts which we need to understand, that at present there is no data on immunization of a pregnant and lactating woman with Covishield or Covaxin. That we have to keep it in the back of our mind. And transmission of infection to the fetus. If a woman is vaccinated in pregnancy with a live attenuated vaccine is very high, but we are not using that vaccine, so we need not worry about it, especially transmission of infection to the fetus. Patients who conceive in the window between the first and the second dose of vaccine should be offered the second dose of vaccine at the appropriate interval. So we should not restrict this patient for second dose of vaccination. We know that fever, malaise, and local injection site pain are the only common side effect of COVID vaccination. Those other are in fact very rare. In fact, the thromboembolic phenomena which we are worried with vaccination is not yet reported in India. And the risk of getting COVID-19 in pregnancy and its resulting morbidity is much more than the theoretical risk from the vaccine. And if the vaccination be completed with the same type vaccine taken first is the preferred advice has been given by the many these healthcare guidelines societies. So at present, the fact is, and the scenario is, the recommendation from Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India state that pregnancy and lactation are contraindications to the vaccination. And at the present time, it is emphasized that individual practitioner cannot advise vaccination to the pregnant and lactating women in India until there is a change in recommendations from the Government of India. And I think that is what we are looking at. And that is why our FOXI statement for vaccination is going to play a major role in this. There are certain contraindications, like if there is any anaphylactic reaction.
Sorry to interrupt you Kundan, but your 1 minute is left.
Yes, I'm on the last slide.
Thank
So if there is any anaphylactic or allergic reaction to the previous dose of COVID-19 vaccine, beware about second dose. If a patient has a diagnosed present COVID-19 infection, or she has active symptoms of COVID-19 infection, or she has been treated very recently with either monoclonal antibodies or convalescent plasma, then I think we have to hold on vaccination. Or even the acutely unwell or critical hospitalized patient due to any other illness, even we can hold on for vaccination. So we have to keep these points in mind. So just to summarize, data from basic science and animal studies have not shown any teratogenic or adverse fetal or neonatal effects of the vaccine. The very real benefits of vaccinating pregnant and lactating women seems to outweigh all those risks with the vaccination. And it is recommended that as we are as a clinicians or gynecologists should be allowed to administer the COVID vaccine in a pregnant and breastfeeding woman with the preparations to manage adverse events. And women should receive the vaccine on any day of the menstrual cycle, even during menstruation. And women should take the vaccine at any point of time before a pregnancy is confirmed, as and when they have an opportunity to do so. And there is no basis for deferring pregnancy or treatments for taking the vaccine. No evidence says that vaccine administration affects fertility or miscarriage rate. So it is not recommended to test for pregnancy before vaccination. And women who are vaccinated in first trimester should not be advised to terminate the pregnancy. Vaccination during pregnancy is advisable even if there has been a past infection, and it should be deferred for 12 weeks, either from the first day of the infection or 4 to 8 weeks from the recovery. So we have to give some time from the recovery, and breastfeeding women should be vaccinated as per the usual method and schedule of the general population. So I urge everybody to join this fight with the right recommendations, and we are hoping for certain good recommendations and guidelines from even our Government of India Health Ministry to guide us for the further care. But as this week going on, probably we do have a scenario where we have to encourage patients going for a vaccination if government portal allows us. So that's the scenario, and we are looking for the further development. So thank you very much for the patient hearing, and thank you very much FOXI office bearers, Dr. Alpesh Gandhi, Dr. Jaideep Tang, for giving me this chance to speak on this very important topic which is related to the present era. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kundan. That was very specific, to the point, and really some hard-hitting take-home messages. And I think we put aside some question answer session at the end of the whole segment, because it's very important to actually discuss rather than have a one-sided academic interaction. So thank you so much for that. And we'll speak to you. I have a few questions myself at the end of the session. I will go on to the next speaker now.
I would like to invite Dr. Rishikesh Pai, who's the Medical Director, Bloom IVF Group, and he's also the administrator for the FOXI Manyata Initiative, which is a very well-recognized initiative of FOXI. He's the Director of Corporate Affairs at the International Fertility Societies, and also adjunct assistant professor at the Eastern Virginia Medical School. Besides being a postgraduate teacher in gynecology at DNB examinations, he's also the visiting professor at the Manipal University, and his main interests are infertility endoscopy and genetics. He's also been awarded the Fellowship of the Royal College, and he's the past Secretary General of and Treasurer of FOXI, where we all have seen him for many, many years together, and the past President of ISAR, IAG, and MOGS. He's received a lot of awards and honors and published many books, and has also been the editor of the edition of British Journal of OBGYN, and he's been awarded the prestigious Lifetime Achievement Award for Outstanding Research in Reproduction by the Indian Society for the Study of Reproduction and Fertility in 2019, and the various other awards by FOXI, the IMA, and other reputed organizations. So over to you, Rishikesh. I think we'll have a very celebrated speaker who will speak to us on COVID.
Thank you, madam. I'll just start my talk. Thanks for that nice introduction. My area is triage testing in for the COVID, and we all know that in 2020 the HT guidelines were released, and that was really a landmark guideline, and it guided us to start our practice, because we were under a lot of stress already in the last year in June. I mean May and June. So ultimately our group, the Bloom IVF, started the practice in the middle of May, and this is my experience of that guideline. In the meantime, there were many other societies that released their guideline. Unfortunately, the ICMR was very busy in handling the COVID pandemic, and the ICMR draft guidelines for recommending ART services during COVID-19 pandemic was, the drafting committee released the guidelines on 24th of December, and I was fortunate under Dr. Balram Bhargav, the Director General of ICMR, and I was fortunate enough to be one of the members. This draft guideline body was headed by Dr. Kamini Rao, and the guidelines have been edited by Dr. Sharma, and they are available on the ICMR site. So in the guidance, I wanted you to just draw the first introduction of the guideline. At present, a total of 1,866 ART clinics and banks have been identified under the National Registry of ART Clinics and Banks in India. It is imperative that meticulous steps are taken to promote safe practices so that the risks related to COVID-19 are minimized, both for the patients and the ART clinical staff. And thus, there is a need to formulate the guidelines. The guidelines were formulated based on this need, and this is the I wanted to highlight this this para. Although the services are now recommencing, but uncertainty still remains as to how treatment services will be resumed, prioritized, and delivered, whether there will be a reclosure of clinics due to a second wave or localized lockdown. So we had already anticipated the second and third wave during the guideline, but we unfortunately didn't prepare ourselves that well. If you look at, before I started triage, I wanted to also point out the guideline recommendation for patient and staff education, which is very important. And they need to be told about the symptoms of the COVID, importance of continued social distancing, importance of minimizing human physical contact, situations where personal PPE may be required, correct method to use the PPE, possibility that treatment may lead to discontinuation if a high-risk clinical situation arises. These are all important in the code of conduct. All staff members and patients will be instructed to avoid unnecessary exposure, both at work and in private, when they're starting the treatment. Each service will prepare compulsory instruction for staff. Attendance at work will be tied to respecting the code of conduct. Activities that are not allowed will be clearly detailed. Patients should sign regularly that they are well and have respected the code. Staff members should sign regularly that they are well and have respected the code, or inform the center's person responsible of any infringement of the code of conduct previously signed. So the further ICMR has recommended that truthful sharing of all information to the clinic when filling questionnaire for triage is very important. You can't lie during triage filling. Complying with any requirements related to testing or tracking and tracing. Restricting movement to that which is absolutely essential. Practicing social distancing by restricting social life and interaction beyond clinic. So staff as well as patients should restrict their social life, practicing frequent hand hygiene, ensuring double masking. Now you need to add double mask here because of the mutant. Staff to read and abide by the SOPs, complying with any quarantine requirements that may be required, self-shielding or maintaining a self-imposed self-quarantine whenever possible, not creating, disturbing, spreading, forwarding fake news or information related to COVID-19 that could be detrimental to self and others. All patients, husband, family to be patient and cooperate in maintaining the SOPs. And this was the indoor staff center adaptation where I don't want to get into it, but here the last 2 points I want to tell you. Emergency agreement between ART centers to guarantee continuity of treatment provision is very important. So you must have emergency agreement with the partner unit so that if there is a major crash, a lot of staff become positive in a unit, you can work with some other unit, and staff have to undergo compulsory triage, occasional testing and quarantine. So this is very important. So what is the triage? So the triage, there are 13 triage questionnaire points which have been made by the guideline of ICMR, which are anyway based on the H3 and the ASRM guideline. Have you been sick in the last 2 weeks? Do you have fever? Are you coughing at present? Do you have a sore throat? Have you lost your sense of smell or taste? Have you been in contact with somebody who has any of these symptoms? Have you traveled to an area at high risk of COVID-19 nationally or internationally? Do you work in a hospital, nursing home or healthcare facility? Have you been in contact with somebody who has COVID-19? Have you been diagnosed with COVID-19? Do you live in a household with somebody who has been diagnosed with COVID-19 infection or has symptoms like fever, cough, loss of smell? If you have been a COVID-19 positive patient and recovered, do you have a certified medical evidence of clearance? And do you have severe medical conditions like diabetes, respiratory disease, chronic kidney disease? So you must have this printed because you can't ask it and they need to sign that. You know, they have to take no, yes, and sign it. So that's a, so now coming to the test. So that's the triage. Now let's talk about the test. So there are three different types of tests. We have the viral tests, which are from the nose or throat swab or sometimes saliva, but that is not yet accepted by even the various main authorities. Then in this viral test, you have two types: nucleic acid amplification test called NATS and antigen test. Then you have the antibody test of the blood for IgM and IgG. So the nucleic acid amplification test on NATs are made up of two types of tests. One is a reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction test, which we call as popularly RT-PCR, which is the recommended test. And then there are isothermal amplification tests, which include various tests like LAMP, TMA, NEAR, HDA, CRISPR, and SDA. If you look at the RT-PCR test, which is the main test, it is a lab-based test and are more acceptable than point-of-care tests. You can do a nasopharyngeal or nasal mid-turbinate or anterior nasal swab. RT-PCR lab tests are considered confirmatory. There is a very low chance of false negative. They are able to pick up very small amounts of viral RNA very early in the infection, including among pre-symptomatic and asymptomatic cases. And the sensitivity of molecular methods can be double-edged because they are so sensitive that sometimes they can pick up the viral genetic material even after patient has recovered from COVID-19 infection. And you can keep on getting a positive test. So many people recommend that after 14 days of treatment, when you recover, you don't have to necessarily do a test because many times it may come positive. What about the CT value significance? CT value indicates the infectivity and not severity of the infection. This test is a qualitative assay and does not quantify the viral load. Various host factors, viral factors, variability in sample collection, site and techniques used by the laboratories can affect CT values. Clinical correlation with patient history, radiology findings, and co-infection with other viral infections is necessary, and a borderline positive case, that is a CT value of more than 30, may give variable results on repeat testing. The possible reasons could be the variation in kits and instruments. Some of this, I must acknowledge that my colleague Anumba has Dr. Anumba, who's a pathologist, has provided some of the information here. And there are some limitations of the RT-PCR, like optimum specimen types and timing of peak viral levels during infections have not been determined. Collection of multiple specimens may be necessary. The repeat specimen may be considered after a gap of 2 to 4 days after the collection of the first specimen for additional testing if required. And negative tests do not preclude SARS-CoV-2 infection and should not be used as a sole basis for management decisions. And this is the factors leading to false negative RT-PCR, inadequate specimen collection, poor quality of sample, sample collected too early or too late in the infection, improper sample handling. There may be technical results like PCR inhibitor, analytical sensitivity of the kit used, etc. The next test, which is a very, very path-breaking test, is the rapid RNA testing, which is based on the LAMP method, loop-mediated isothermal amplification. It is just now established by many labs now in Mumbai. It can give a test in 13 minutes. In fact, if this infection keeps on going on for a long time, I was thinking of installing it in our own IVF centers, because we can do rapid tests on both the staff as well as, or we connect, already many labs are doing this test, though it's a bit of a 4 times costlier test, but it is very important to do it. Of course, it is not as sensitive as a RT-PCR test. Then we have the rapid antigen test, which you can give a result in 30 minutes. It is very good test, but it is not a positive test should not be considered as true positive and does not need reconfirmation by RT-PCR. So positive tests, you don't need to confirm by RT-PCR, but a negative test, you must confirm by an RT-PCR. And the advantage is it's quite cheap compared to the RT-PCR test. Then we have the antibody test. So IgG and IgM antibody test, which is there. And this is based on the nucleocapsid protein. So antibodies to the nucleocapsid protein of the COVID virus in patients suspected of infection, and is useful for detection of PCR negative COVID-19 cases, especially for patients who present late with a very low viral load below the detection limit of RT-PCR assays, or when lower respiratory tract sampling is not possible. Then we have the total antibody testing, which is also there, which can be done for now. They do it for the vaccines, etc. So I'm not going to it. So this is a beautiful graph. So if you can see at day 0, the patient starts getting infected. First 5 days of the infection, this is asymptomatic. After that, the symptoms start. On the 7th day, the IgM levels start rising. So the PCR test normally after 5 days, it became positive here as well. But as you can see here in the early, but better to do it after 5 days of the infection. But as soon as you suspect, you can do it. You have fever and all that. Then of course the IgM test starts, and this is a nice graph. If you combine the PCR with the IgM and IgG levels, you can come to a good level of conclusion as to what is happening in it. Who should get tested? Patients or staff who have symptoms of COVID-19 or who are triage positive. Most people who have had close contact. So what is close contact? And this is defined by a lot of countries that within 6 feet of an infected person for a cumulative total period of 15 minutes or more over a 24-hour period. So if you're a fully vaccinated person with no COVID-19 symptoms, you do not need to be tested following an exposure to someone with, most of us are now vaccinated and we wear double masking, we are having our protection. So we don't need to get tested if we come in contact with a person. Otherwise, you'll have to stay home all the time. And people who have tested positive for 19 with the past 3 months and recovered do not need to get tested following an exposure as long as they do not develop new symptoms. If you look at the triage and testing strategy of the ICMR, and is the 2 weeks prior to the treatment, you start doing the triage. And if triage is positive during those 2 weeks, you do RT-PCR. If RT-PCR of the husband or wife comes positive, you cancel the cycle. Just prior to starting treatment, to again do RT-PCR, that is day 2 of the cycle, either a ovum pickup cycle or a IUI cycle or a frozen transfer, you do RT-PCR for husband, wife, donor or surrogate. And if it is positive, you cancel the cycle. To do, once you start the stimulation or once you start the hormone replacement therapy in a frozen embryo transfer or a surrogate cycle, you should do triage throughout the cycle. And if at any time during the triage, during the cycle, if she is positive, you should do RT-PCR. Prior to the trigger in an IVF patient or prior to starting progesterone in a frozen embryo transfer patient, again, you do RT-PCR on both husband. For this, there is a little bit of controversy here whether for a frozen embryo transfer cycle, would you do a RT-PCR for the husband? I'm not clear on that issue at present. You cancel the cycle. If you have on the day of the pickup or the trigger, if there is a positive, patient becomes positive, then you freeze the eggs or embryos. Suppose you're doing oocyte freezing, you freeze the eggs or embryos in high definition straws in separate containers and quarantine it like any other quarantine. So we have in the ICMR document divided it into 5 groups, group 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So group 1 is both partners are triaged at low risk, negative clinical history, lifestyle compatible with low minimal risk of contact with potentially infected individuals. Both partners are asymptomatic. You do RT-PCR tests. It should be done before starting the ART treatment and before oocyte retrieval or HCG trigger. If it is negative, continue treatment. If it is positive, postpone the treatment. So we go on through these various groups. I'll not go. There's group number 2 is there. Group number 3, the 5th group is important. So if patient or partners are symptomatic after oocyte retrieval in an IVF cycle, perform RT-PCR before further treatment. If RT-PCR is negative, continue the treatment. If RT-PCR is positive, postpone the treatment. Patients who become COVID positive after oocyte retrieval but prior to embryo transfer should be advised to postpone the treatment and freeze all their embryos for future use. So this is what I wanted to show you. This is a comparative statistic that we had done of our group June, July of the 2020, the first 2 months, and then in the August and September of 2020. And you can see here that in the Mumbai region, we had a positivity rate of 2.2% and compared to and this is in red. So in the Mumbai region, the rate was nearly constant, but in the Delhi region, because there was a sudden surge later on, the rate had increased. But now, before I started the talk, I phoned my personal assistant. So I asked her, in April, we had done 50 patients that included OM pickups, IUIs, and like embryo transfers. And she told me that 7 were positive out of the 50. So we had compared to last year, we had a 14%. So in the second wave, which is going on, we had a 14% positivity rate as compared to last year. And if you look at the statistics of last year, I compared 2019 with 2020. So 2019 was a normal year. So in a normal year, we compared in a particular June to September time, we could say that we divided them into poor prognosis and good prognosis patients. So in that period, in 2019, we had done 412 patients. Of that, 268 we did good prognosis patients and 144 we did poor prognosis patients. In the 2020, on the other hand, in the OM pickup, we did, of course, we dropped our number. See, you can see, imagine the drop. We did only 40 pickups. Totally, we did 75 pickups compared to a huge number last year in 2019. And the ratio of the poor to good prognosis was nearly equal. So there was a definite drop, major drop in the good prognosis patients. And looking at the staff positivity rate, in the 2020, we had 11% doctors positive, 14% embryologists positive, and 9% staff positive. Total positivity rate was 10%. While I just did a calculation just an hour back, I phoned everyone in the groups and asked them, and we came to 16% doctor positive compared to last year of 11%. Then embryologist was positive, who is still in quarantine now, and that is 0.7% compared to 14.2% last year. Staff was 0 positive out of 33. So definitely vaccination has made a difference. Vaccination, and we have become more street smart. We do everything very properly. So in summary, I would like to tell you what are my thoughts about the pandemic, because it has been a really hard struggle for me. I had to think in advance. Financially, I had to strategize myself, how to get the patients, how to do the patients. And I feel that some of the things are 10 times a day hand washing, social distancing, 6-foot rule, mask 2-layer with 2 different materials for people, but we can use an N95 and a triple layer surgical mask, which I use. Screening, triage, temperature testing. Stay home if you have any symptoms. No indoors. Avoid malls, restaurants, lifts, gyms, etc. I normally climb the stairs nowadays. Don't take the lift. Tackle COVID aerosol. See, COVID is an aerosol disease. So in all my indoor and outdoor, I have created, in IVF lab, we have got air handling units. We have plasma filters we have put plasma filters everywhere. We have put UV lights in everywhere. So when we go off, we just switch on the UV and we, fry everything around. Change your lifestyle. We are looking at that. I think we'll have to put it as 3 to 5 year problem. I thought that during my Foxy presidency, I will probably have a normal year, but I don't think I will have a normal year. huge environmental and economic burden will be there. Economy will be devastated if we suddenly go back to normal. Controlled return to routine should be the norm. I feel that, and when this the lockdown was lifted, in fact, I personally had phoned one of the ministers and I told them that please don't lift the lockdown. Please don't normalize the suburban railway system. So after the second wave is over, also we have to not lift the lockdown. Vaccination has to go hand in hand. Every year we'll have to vaccinate because the strain will change. Death is not good for the economy. You're seeing it all around. We need to test, trace, and treat, and we need to keep on increasing our health infrastructure. So what is my strategy? We need to have a mass education program. Responsible behavior will prevent you from killing others. Consolidation of our own private practice and public practice. Human handling of workforce. Pay cuts, layoffs have to be thought of. I've nearly laid off about 5 to 7% of my staff last year. Don't compromise on marketing and technological upgrade of your unit. You must keep on marketing and upgrading your hospitals all the time. You can't do let up. Long-term financial planning is very important. Conservation of resources and savings is very important. Go back to school and relearn and retrain yourself. Enjoy your life in real time. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, and create new business streams. So my COVID mantra is, what is the Steve Jobs mantra? You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever. I put God as well, but that's what Steve Jobs said. And I would like to thank you all for a very patient hearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that talk, Rishikesh. And now we would like to invite the next speaker. We'll have the discussion at the end. And may I request Rishma to introduce the next speaker, please.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to introduce Dr. Jaideep Tang. I don't think there's anyone in this country, at least right now, who doesn't know Dr. Jaideep Tang, the Secretary General of the Federation of OBGYN Societies of India. He has done an amazing job as a Secretary General, and he's also just the past president of the Mumbai OBGYN Society. He's the chair of the International Federation FIGO Committee for Safe Abortion, and all of us know his interest in that area. He's been working in that space for many, many years. He's the Deputy Secretary, Asia-Oceania Federation of OBGYN, the AOFOG. Again, been very, very active in that area. He's also the ex-chair Publication and Newsletter Committee of AOFOG. MT Committee of FOX. He's been very active in that in the last few years. He's been the Vice President, Forum for Enhancement of Quality in Healthcare, and many, many achievements in that space. He, of course, has his own big infertility obstetric-gynec center in Mumbai, and he's a visiting consultant for IVF at 15 IVF centers, does lots and lots of cycles all over. So I think he's really the right person for giving us this talk, personal experience, as well as a huge amount of theoretical knowledge. So over to you, Dr. Jaideep Tang.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rishma, for that. And because of this pandemic, I will say usual warm, affectionate, and kind and generous introduction. It's always such a pleasure and a privilege to have people like you and Dr. Durusha chairing any session that you're speaking in. And admittedly, also a bit of a challenge because both of you are so erudite and well-spoken and articulate. Let me, at the beginning, thank the President, Dr. Alpesh Gandhi, and the coordinators of this initiative, Nilesh, Aarti, Rupal, and Aruna, who have put this whole initiative together, if I may say so. I hope I'm audible and my slide is seen.
Yes, absolutely. It'd be nice if you can be a little louder, though. You're such a soft-spoken gentleman. We don't mind hearing you.
Is that better? Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rishma. So thank you, Kundan and Rishikesh, for those lovely talks. I'm sure everybody who has attended has indeed benefited from those presentations. What I'm going to do is give you a broad view, if I may say so, not only on the practice of ART in the pandemic, but also of COVID-19 in general at some points in time, focusing then on what impact the pandemic has had on infertility practice in particular. This was a statement which has resonated throughout the pandemic, that more women and children may die due to the consequences of inaccessible and inadequate health services than will perish from COVID-19 itself. Let's also not forget that nearly 70% of frontline health workers are women. And one of the issues which women face in the reproductive age group is no doubt either fertility promotion or fertility control. I cannot stress enough the fact that fertility control and fertility promotion are indeed two sides of the same coin. And in an ideal world, we should not be looking at one without the other, simply because the impact of infertility can really only be gauged realistically by those who suffer from it. It's unfortunate that we don't look upon infertility as a public health problem. We look upon it as something like a problem of the privileged, if I may say so. Maternal mortality, perinatal mortality, SRHR access are of course all important, but I do believe that fertility treatment should be treated on the same par as all these other issues of women's health. One of the problems of the pandemic has simply been that we tend to apply the same standards of evidence to our knowledge about the pandemic as we do to our other scientific problems. So I did this Medline search. I had actually given the same presentation, it's updated now, in November 2020, when I was invited by the Bangladesh Society to speak on the impact of COVID-19 on infertility. And when I had done a Medline search at that time, you can see that in November 2020, the Medline search showed 86 results. And now when I did the Medline search today in the morning in May 2021, it shows 169 results. If you do a search for infertility alone, you will literally get thousands and thousands of results. What I'm trying to convey, and I hope I'm conveying it adequately, is that we cannot turn to evidence all the time when it comes to COVID-19, simply because the time that COVID-19 has been around has not been enough, fortunately, to generate that kind of evidence. So whatever evidence, whatever guidance we are essentially talking about or formulating for that matter has limitations. With disclaimers like this, that it's not meant to replace clinical judgment or specialist consultation, but strengthen clinical management of these patients and provide up-to-date guidance. At the end of the day, there is a point when evidence simply runs out, and looking for that evidence would actually be a waste of time. Like that person says, it only takes me 2.5 hours of wasting time on the internet to do 5 minutes of work. Doesn't mean we should disregard evidence, but we should take evidence in that context. So who was affected for infertility treatment? Quite literally everybody who sought the treatment. And that is indeed a large number. Conservative estimates indicate that over 1.5 million IVF cycles are carried out each year, resulting in approximately 400,000 babies born. And if you look at all kinds of estimates, you'll realize that the IVF cycles represent only the tip of the iceberg in terms of the number of patients who consult for infertility treatment. It is therefore a fair assumption that the COVID pandemic affected millions of women and couples in the reproductive age group who were seeking fertility treatment. I liken the pandemic to the chaos theory. This is a very elegant piece of work which talks about how a small and seemingly insignificant event can have a large and major consequence. In one of the original papers on the chaos theory, it was said that something as small as the flutter of a butterfly's wing can ultimately cause a typhoon halfway around the world. And the COVID pandemic has been quite illustrative of that, because the COVID pandemic has not only disrupted clinicians and patients, it's also disrupted supply chains. Just think about it. If you're doing a pickup, typically your pickup needle is from one country, your medium is from another country, your disposables, pipettes, something as simple as the pipette which you use to suction out the follicular fluid and remove the oocytes from the follicular fluid also comes from a different country. So in a sense, when you're running an IVF clinic or when you're treating a patient for infertility, you are at the mercy of the global supply chain. And this global supply chain, no doubt, was affected because of the pandemic. Besides the global supply chain being affected, there were also problems with last mile delivery. We know that in a lot of instances, last mile delivery was tremendously affected. Disrupted access also resulted not only from these supply chain issues, but also from the fact that several services, staffings, and funds are diverted to support COVID-19 responses. And we are nowadays talking about this problem of the non-availability or supposed non-availability of liquid nitrogen in the future, because the PMO has just come out with a circular saying that plants which manufacture liquid nitrogen will have to be repurposed to produce oxygen. And we are concerned whether we will get enough liquid nitrogen to sustain all the cryopreserved gametes and embryos that we have in our IVF clinics. There is, of course, the financial insecurity and the additional caregiving burdens which were referred to by Rishikesh in his presentation. We always say keep the woman at the center. And I think even this instance also, besides looking at our ability to deliver services, we need to look at whether patients would like to receive services at this time. And it has been to a certain extent a surprising finding here that a lot of patients actually said, "Doctor, can you please do my treatment now? Because I'm working from home, I don't have to travel anymore, and I hopefully will be able to get more rest." This has been a counterintuitive kind of a outcome of the pandemic, if I may say so. Do we know whether the coronavirus has a direct effect on the gametes? There was some evidence to show that if a male got a coronavirus infection, it could affect the sperm count. However, there really is no concrete data. There was also the issue of how long to wait after a coronavirus infection to prevent the transmission of the coronavirus, particularly through, for example, an IUI. We have always been pretty certain that it doesn't get transmitted, but the data is simply not available. To add and compound all these issues is, of course, the famous biological clock. And I think this is one of the things which is very important when you talk about regularizing services. So a lot of guidelines and all came out, but I quite like this guideline, which was published on the ARCS and BFS website, which essentially said that you can continue to provide treatment if the patient and the physician would both like to, in a sense, I'm paraphrasing over here, and if adequate precautions could be taken to prevent the spread of COVID-19. This was published where it said that depending on the fertility potential of the patient, so patients who were at risk of running out of their biological clock would be triaged or should be subjected to fertility treatment earlier. So this is a nice summary of the recommendations of COVID-19 during fertility treatment by several associations, the ESHRE, the ASRM, the ARCS, and the CFAS. And essentially what they all say is that you do need to do a risk triage by self-assessment. The triage is usually based on symptoms. You should do triage at least twice, preferably before the treatment and before the actual procedure. Do you advocate for COVID-19 testing? Well, the Canadian Fertility Association recommended that you should refer the patient to local public health services. The other said you should have it in-house. And then, there were the other issues, and you can see that uniformly, all of them seem to suggest that triaging is required, and at some point in time, COVID test would also be required. So this was our approach to fertility treatment during the COVID pandemic. We actually stopped IVF cycles completely in March, and we resumed doing IVF cycles by end of August or September. And when we resumed, the few principles that we followed was, of course, information and consent, prioritization and exclusion. For example, patients who did not seem to be requiring an IVF treatment on a relatively urgent basis, that means patients who were younger, etc., were asked to wait if they could. Triaging, screening, and testing, and we used history, temperature checks, and history of exposure for triaging. And we did the RT-PCR 2 days or around the 9th day of stimulation. And if we found that it was negative, we went ahead. We almost stopped doing sperm donation at this time, tried to reduce face-to-face interaction. And again, like a general principle, we minimized the clinical risk with the use of antibiotics and increased use of GnRH agonist triggers. We do all antagonist cycles. So wherever we felt there was even the slightest risk, we used the GnRH agonist triggers. And one interesting thing that we did was that for our oocyte donors, we started doing antibody testing for them. And we recruited only the oocyte donors who were already tested positive for the antibodies. And we hoped that by doing that, we prevented these donors, because they were already antibody positive, from acquiring corona after the procedure. We tried to minimize risk in the laboratory by reducing the number of personnel, PPEs, etc. And we changed our working patterns a little bit to reduce the number of patients in the clinic at any given time. So we phased out the number of cycles that we did or procedures that we did. So a broader view of corona brings me to this, that a purely statistical view of the disease obviously creates panic. I remember this person, Dr. Lakshmi Narayan, he gave interviews on projections of cases and fatalities, and he said that we would have 300 to 500 million infections and 20 lakh deaths by June. He gave that interview in March of last year, and he said by June, 20 lakh Indians would die. And he based this on some mathematical model. Perhaps, I mean, he's a mathematician and I am not, but perhaps he should have considered the fact that forecasting is a very risky business. If you look at this nice publication from Nadella and Swaminathan, you will see that all forecasting models have a strong tendency to overpredict. And India cannot be tackled with a homogeneous mathematical model, because there are literally 100 different Indias every 100 kilometers apart. So at one point in time, if you looked at the predictions, you were like that surgeon who tells the nurse that, nurse, get on the internet, go to surgery.com, scroll down and click on the "Are you totally lost" icon. And then, of course, you had all these issues with WhatsApp, and WhatsApp University, the School of Medicine, which certified just about everybody as MD doctors, was really becoming quite a problem to deal with when you looked at patients. The fact of the matter, and I say this with a very sort of conscious, in full consciousness, given the fact that we are in the midst of a raging second wave, that India has perhaps till now not done as badly as we thought it would compared to the rest of the world. I think if you step back, and again, I say this with the full understanding that only those who have suffered will know what the real problems were. But taking a little broader view, what could have been an unmitigated disaster has now seemed to be a mitigated disaster. About vaccines, and I really like that meme over there. When the vaccines were not there, everybody was screaming for vaccine, vaccine, and more vaccine. And then when the vaccine came, it was like, oh my God, that was too fast. We don't really think we can trust this vaccine. Please remember that a normal vaccine takes something like 15 to 18 years before it comes into clinical practice. If you look at the COVID vaccine, we have got this vaccine in less than a year, which is an absolutely remarkable scientific feat. And the fact of the matter really is that 1 billion doses of the vaccines have already been administered with a remarkable safety record. I don't understand vaccine hesitancy, very frankly. And what is very encouraging, if you look at the graph, is that vaccines accelerate with every 100 million doses administered. For example, the first 100 million took 61 days, the second one took 19, and the last 100 million has taken only 5 days for administration. And as this article in Bloomberg called it, 1 billion exhalations of relief, it will only be faster. And call me an implacable optimist, but I am optimistic that there is light at the end of the tunnel. There have been concerns raised about whether India will have an adequate number of vaccines to vaccinate everybody. But if you look at this data again from Bloomberg, you will see that from all the countries in the world, India has the 5th largest advance order for vaccines, the 5th largest from the entire world. In fact, India currently has delivered the largest number of vaccinations in the world. It is just that our population is so immense that if you look at it in terms of percentage of population, our percentage covered is not enough. So of course, we are worried. But remember and compare this to the last pandemic that we had in 1918, which infected a third of the world's population and killed 50 million people. We are, put it in that context, much better placed now. Of course, science never really offers a last word, and scientists who believe in absolute certainty must be viewed with a degree of suspicion, because that makes us believers rather than scientists participating. And it shouldn't have to happen to you for it to matter to you. And I think as healthcare workers, the whole narrative around our place in society has undergone some kind of a shift, if I may say so, because of the pandemic. And lastly, as we approach, and I strongly believe that we are approaching the end of the pandemic in the rush to get back to normal, let's use this time to decide which parts of normal are worth rushing back to. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jaideep. I always wonder how you manage to be optimistic in these completely depressing times. But I've seen that right from the beginning of the pandemic, you've kept the morale up and managed to remain fairly optimistic and always look at the glass half full, which is something maybe we should learn from you. So I think we can begin a few questions. I'll start with one from Jaideep, which I think is something which is worrying all the IVF centers about the liquid nitrogen, which you spoke about, and the government's demand of diverting all manufacturing units to make oxygen, which is obviously the need of the day. But the embryos lying there in those liquid nitrogen containers are equally precious. They are also lives. So what is Foxy doing about this? Or has some action been taken, or what is your opinion?
So thank you, Rishma. Just yesterday, I think I had a conversation with Rishikesh about this, and Rishikesh had called me up and we were trying to devise some kind of a game plan. What we are doing currently is planning to write to the Prime Minister's office. We are in the process of getting some basic data on the amount of liquid nitrogen that is usually available and how much of it is used for IVF purposes, because you will understand that what we use in IVF is probably a very minuscule quantity of the amount of liquid nitrogen that is actually produced in the country, because liquid nitrogen is got a large variety of applications across industry, etc. I think yesterday Dr. Trivedi and I had a conversation, and he said he had spoken to someone in the ministry, and according to him, he said this is not going to be a uniform kind of a thing. Liquid nitrogen will still continue to be available. However, they will prioritize the plants which will be repurposed for the purpose of producing oxygen. But there is no clarity on this. And if you look at the circular from the PMO, which I read in the morning, it's more in the spirit of exploring the possibility of doing this rather than saying that they are definitely going to do it. So I hope that by tomorrow or maybe day after, we will have a unified response where all the office bearers of Foxy, Rishikesh, Alpesh Bhai, Shanta, Nandita, and everybody will be taken into consultation, and we will be able to craft a unified response to this. And hopefully the PMO will listen to us. But from what so far I have understood is that a limited capacity of the liquid nitrogen plants is going to be repurposed for oxygen.
Thank you, Jaideep, because I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, there was complete chaos about liquid nitrogen, because like you said, the supply chains had completely broken down and we were like dwindling levels of liquid nitrogen and in extreme stress about it. So I hope we don't face those situations again. Dr. Duru, you would like to put forward some questions?
But there's another viewpoint is that that sometimes the liquid in which we are freezing the embryos could be a contaminant also and take forward embryos. I mean, probably the possibility of spreading COVID infection because it survives in that cold temperature. This is the latest paper published by Deepak Modi from the NIRH, and it has come in on the 28th of April. And what he says with his research is that it's better to freeze the embryos at the not at the blastocyst stage, but on day 3 embryos. Because when they reach the blastocyst stage, they've got more amenity. I mean, there's a higher chance of them getting infected. And therefore, during this COVID period, it's a good idea to freeze them on day 3 rather than freezing on day 5. So these are the thoughts which have come out from this paper, which is a brilliant paper. And it's published in one of the very good journals, which is, I'll try and see if I can get the name. But he also talked about earlier publications wherein they have found COVID even in a first trimester pregnancy. So it definitely is being transmitted transplacentally. In the mid trimester, they have detected COVID, which was a stillbirth. And they have found that there is enough evidence that COVID is being transmitted from the mother to the child. So in short, even in the first trimester, if it is being transmitted, my concerns are that if we are doing an embryo transfer and following that, the woman develops COVID for whatever reasons. She was negative when you did the procedure, but now she's become positive in the first trimester. There is always a concern about it affecting the embryo. So I really don't know whether, how it's going to affect. There's no evidence on what really are the effects on that fetus. So we need to, think what we really need to do about this. There are guidelines, I agree, but there's not enough evidence on what happens to the embryo. we'll know probably 10 years later what we are dealing with. So how do we tackle that issue is, has been my thought. So anyone?
Can I
Yes.
respond? Yeah. So I
Yes.
think, Madam, as you obviously are aware, detecting COVID and COVID infection are two completely different things. It's just like post-vaccination where you can get infected with COVID. The vaccine doesn't protect you from the infection; it protects you from the morbidity. So I think these are the nuances, if I may say so, which have really not come out in the literature. So, for example, if you do a test and you find that the fetus has got COVID, either antigen, antibody, or whatever, what are the implications of that? As you said, we will come to know over a period of time. But what is probably already clear, in my view, is the fact that the severity of a COVID infection depends on viral load. And if you're looking at viral load, what can be transmitted through oocytes or through semen is probably going to be extremely low. And we don't really know whether that low viral load is going to translate into any significant effects. That's also a sort of a counterintuitive, if I may say so, argument that can be made. However, as I also said, that the amount of evidence for this is simply so low, simply because of the fact that COVID has been around only for a year. I'm sure that more and more evidence will come, and as Kundan and Dr. Rishikesh have said, we need to take all the precautions, but at the same time, also try and temper those precautions with some realism. And I think it helps to remember that when COVID started, there was so much concern about surfaces transmitting COVID. And that was based on two studies, one from Australia and one from the US. And I read those studies and I said, this is absolutely ridiculous, because the studies looked at transmission of COVID in ideal conditions. And the real world is not an ideal condition. And now both the studies have been debunked. I read recently that, we now know for sure that surface transmission of COVID simply does not occur. So you don't have to worry about, wiping everything with alcohol. In fact, I would go to the other extent of saying that this has caused more harm than good. If you looked at some of the incidences of fire in our hospitals, one of the hospitals particularly reported that there did not seem to be a problem, that ICU had just been sanitized with an alcohol-based sanitizer. And then there was a spark, and it was this alcohol-based sanitizer which helped to spread the fire. So I think at some point in time, we'll just have to take a step back and try and see where all this is really taking us.
I suppose we are all learning. Rishikesh, I had a question. You spoke about triage, and over the entire COVID time, we've been all speaking about triaging the patients. Is that phase now over? Because have you been abroad? Have you met somebody who has COVID? Have you been out? Everybody has all yes to all the answers. All those questions don't matter anymore, because now around at this stage of the pandemic, everybody has COVID, or everybody's neighbor or building or friend has COVID. So I think we have to probably rely more on testing rather than the triage questions now. It was good in the early part of the pandemic, but I think now it's
I think what you're saying is correct, but I was telling you what the guideline is. In fact, I would like everyone to know that there is a consent form also that has been made, and this is legal. So the guideline is binding. So you have to download that form, because if the patient comes across that form and there's some issue later on, there may be a problem. So I would like to request you all to download the ICMR consent form, which has been made specially for the. As far as the triage is concerned, you're right. There is no bind, but like now we have become so used to it that unfortunately, even the testing, just now only as you people were talking, I got a message that one of the patients that we had done from Bangalore, pickup was done, and she has turned to be positive 3 days after the pickup. Now, so what Dr. Durusha says is correct. So what I was thinking, that though we know for sure that there's no known cause of transmission of a HIV infection or a HBsAg infection through liquid nitrogen, there is a theoretical risk. So as far as possible, we should do it in closed system. So high definition straws is important. So closed system, And because, I had some issue with some patient many years back, and I had really read a lot about this. So what the main guideline is that you should never freeze the testicular tissue with the oocytes and the embryo, because if the testicular tissue is positive for HBsAg or HIV, that has a very high risk of transmission to the other gametes. So you should always keep the testicular origin tissues from the remaining tissues as far as that is concerned. The vapor freezing may be but though none of us do vapor freezing. And the third is a closed security straw, which we use, and we also do a lot of HIV work we do in DY Patil. So in serodiscordant couples, so we do use closed system. So and I found no difference between the open system and the closed system. Pregnancy rate, recovery rates, and I think that now the time has come to really shift to the closed system. I don't think, in the future, if there's a transmission in the open system, that can be a litigation potential for all of us. So maybe there is a time for shifting to the closed system in the future.
Triage questionnaire has to be every time, because probably doing RT-PCR positive, negative status just give us a confidence that she was probably not exposed in last couple of 3 days. It doesn't give us anxiety for the future status. Every time I think we see our patient, questionnaire will help us at least to understand, okay, she's negative, but she might be positive.
One question I wanted to miss, for example, I was reading about the vaccine. So what would you advise? Because again, there's a big issue now, certainly, because I've got received 4 calls from since morning. Hey, doctor, should I take the vaccine? Because now 18-year-old, so should I take the vaccine? Or I should do the embryo transfer? Should I do the home pickup? Or I should do the vaccine and then do the home pickup? Now I can't give that answer. From my angle, I would say, okay, let's do it in parallel. Because now again, if there's a postponement, 2 months of postponement will take place. It can be a financial death knell for many of us.
No, and
So
plus
now
vaccines are not available. So they may get the vaccine. Yeah. They may get the vaccines in June, probably. June, somewhere they'll get the vaccine.
And now if I don't tell them that you don't take the vaccine and she gets COVID positive, then
No, I think if it's a young patient, we should encourage them to take the vaccine first and then proceed with the treatment. Because now after the vaccine, they say even after 2 weeks of taking the vaccine, you can go ahead with your procedure. So that's number one. The second thing is we must remember that we have the mutant strain of COVID now in our country, which is 60% more infectious. And that is something is killing young people today. And I think we need to be more particular about this. I mean, if they take the vaccine and we go ahead, the severity is much less. So I think that is something in a younger patient, if we encourage them to, so many patients are coming and asking about this. And frankly, what I'm doing is I'm telling them, it's better you take the vaccine first, just wait for 2 months, take the vaccine, take your 2 doses, second dose ke baad you wait for 14 days and then we'll start your treatment. But if it's an older patient and she's, quite anxious because obviously because of a biological age, I prefer to, do the ovum pickup, and freeze the embryos on day 3, and then do a transfer, hopefully when things are better. I'm more keen on that because I'm concerned about this COVID affecting babies.
Madam, but tell me one thing. If suppose an old patient is there, wouldn't 1 month really make a difference? See, someone will say, oh, why you are immediately starting the treatment? Why not wait for the second shot?
We don't know when it will happen. No? The thing is that when things will get better, sometimes like say in the second wave, which came after 6 months, we don't know when the third wave is going to come. We don't know what's going to happen in future. So at least I feel we counsel at least I counsel the patients, and then I let them make the decision whether they want to go ahead or not.
We have to allow the patient to make the decision.
Yes, Jaideep.
Madam, just a practical thing that I agree with you. That's what we are doing. We're telling the patients take the vaccine first. Yes. And we are telling them that we will do your procedure a month after your second dose, which essentially means a fairly significant delay in the treatment. For patients on the spectrum at on the higher reproductive age, etc., like you said, we are doing the pickup and freezing the embryos and then. However, one practical thing that I'm telling the patients is that take Covaxin if it's possible, not Covishield. Because the duration between the 2 doses of Covaxin is then the duration recommended with Covishield. So if you have an infertility patient and if they get a choice, it is better that they take Covaxin, because that means you will be able to do the treatment within 2 months. And if you're telling them to wait for Covishield, then you're going to have to wait for 3 to 4 months. So that's just a practical thing which we thought about. Of course, patients don't have
More
choices.
practical thing is that the vaccines are not available for the next 2 months, maybe.
So they will be there.
Anyway,
They'll come in, they'll come in.
Right
Yeah.
now, there's nothing.
Jaideep, there's another recommendation from, I think, the ASRM, that even with the first shot, you can start the treatment in
Absolutely.
parallel.
Yes.
So
In
for
case
patients
there
who
is
have
a
taken
ovarian
one
reserve is
shot,
low or something.
so
But
actually,
over there, they are using the Pfizer and the Moderna
Pfizer is a
vaccine,
better
and that
vaccine,
is- it's
unfortunately.
more effective.
I don't think that in terms of efficacy, Pfizer is a better vaccine. Pfizer has a lot of issues with storage. We are never going
Yeah,
to
yeah, it's a big
minus
problem.
70-degree storage. right in our
180
country.
degrees
Our
minus.
big advantage is our Indradhanush immunization program. And that whole program is predicated on a cold chain of 2 to 8 degrees, -2 to -8. And that is what is being leveraged to provide the Covaxin. And if you're looking at Pfizer and Moderna, you will have to establish
No, we can't do that.
supply chain which has those ultra chill freezers
Impossible.
at -70. And also, I don't think Pfizer and Moderna are the answers. Sputnik, yes. Covaxin,
Johnson and Johnson vaccine is a
Johnson,
one-dose
yes.
vaccine,
yes.
and
But
it doesn't
not,
require this cold chain.
correct. So I think we have to leverage our
we have to
strengths,
wait with
you know.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One question to the expert faculty. One question. If India starts vaccination during pregnancy and lactation, what is the choice of vaccine you would recommend for a pregnant lady and a lactating mother? Will it be Covishield, which is adenovirus vector vaccine, or will it be Covaxin, which is a killed virus vaccine?
Actually, if you look at the literature, I think the COVID, which has been proven that even if there is adenovirus transmission, it doesn't cause a, adverse effect on the fetus. So I think the first choice will be with the proven, if you look at the literature, will be Covishield for pregnant patient especially. Okay, that's.
I wanted to tell you that I was reading about the vaccine. So yes, Americans. ECOG recommendation has been, of course, that because they have done a lot of studies on the Pfizer vaccine, so that's safe. But the RCOG recommendation is you can vaccinate, but if it has to be vaccine in pregnancy, it has to be the Pfizer, not the AstraZeneca vaccine.
Because there
That
is
is the
no
recommendation.
study on the
RCOG recommendation
studies.
is that if pregnancy, don't use the Astra, use the Pfizer.
Because they've done their studies on that vaccine, and that is the
So,
reason.
so we'll have to do, as Madam rightly said, we'll have to do the studies on the vaccine.
That's
And then come out with our own guideline.
I have one last question. When we are doing IVF ovarian stimulation, we tend to use immunosuppressive agents at some point during the cycle, sometimes before a transfer or an post-transfer. So would you use that now with the COVID possibility going on? I don't use it, but there are many who use steroids. So that is strongly to be, not recommended. So that is one guideline I think we need to add, that not to use steroids during the cycle, because then it increases your chances of picking up infections.
not standard of care. So I guess
I think that's a good point.
It's very important. I think.
Yeah.
Many centers, they are using steroids during IVF.
There are
cycles. So I
some
think
people, there are some centers who are using it, and so that is a signal we need to give them. And the other evidence has come on PCO patients, wherein they have a higher risk of getting severe COVID. And in those patients, especially when you're doing if they get hyperstimulated, of course, you'll do your best not to hyperstimulate them, then again, they have a higher chance of developing all the complications of COVID. Because we know that it's a situation like what happens in any of those comorbidities where you get extra clotting, etc., which can happen in these patients, especially if they're hyperstimulated. So there is a change of metformin which we need to do. We need to change their drugs, etc. So we need to be very careful with our PCO patients who are on medications, especially diabetic medications, anti-diabetics, and metformin, and if any of them are being given hormones. So we need to be careful with them,
So,
especially.
Madam, what is the recommendation? Where metformin should not be given?
at that point in time, yes, we have to stop. As a matter of fact, we have made a very small video of about almost 2.5 to 3 minutes, which is just being released today from the PCOS Society on COVID and PCOS. And they've found some common markers between PCO patients and the severely COVID patients. Some almost out of the 60 markers, 20 markers are present in these patients, which are not present in non-PCOS. So I think genetically also PCO patients tend to be more at risk. And therefore, I think from the PCO Society of India, we are planning to campaign for them to get priority. But we had thought of it earlier, but now if all 18 plus are being given, then it doesn't make sense. Yeah.
So for the vaccination, they should be prioritized so that they can
Absolutely.
Yeah, because typically, I guess there are more morbidities, obesity,
Yes,
you know, all
they
the
have more of a pro-inflammatory disorder. That's why.
So again, the biggest problem we'll face when we want to register the patient's name on the portal. There, they do not ask whether your status of pregnancy or whether when you go to the center, probably there they might face a problem even after registering.
Yes.
If she found to have a pregnant woman and then going for a vaccine, I think there our government of India has to be very clear after listening all those people and Foxy guidelines and very careful. I mean, handle and very clear instructions.
I think that Dr. Jaideep and Dr. Alpesh have to really push for it.
Yeah, we need to do that for sure. We need to do that.
But my
We are
worry
doing
is
more
that,
aggressive.
Yeah. So the worry is that pregnancy being a slightly more thrombogenic state, and then you have a Covishield vaccine, which has this little notoriety of causing thrombosis, and you are a little concerned whether both of them will aggravate pre-existing risk factors. So
yeah, but the risk of having COVID during pregnancy is 10 times higher.
It's worse. I agree with it.
It's worse.
Yeah.
So it's like between the devil and the sea.
I think we should really push for the vaccine. Jaideep, of course, you have done the first step, but we should really be more aggressive with the government.
And unless and until we go ahead, we'll not have even the data with us, what we want to have with the Covishield or Covaxin, whether it is safe or no. We have to go ahead. That's the thing.
On that happy note of we have to go ahead, I think we should call it a wrap. If our coordinators and conveners think we have had a reasonably interesting discussion.
Actually, there were many questions, but because of time constraint, we cannot include everyone. And those who are watching this, you can please ask your all questions in personal chat to our all speakers. And thank you very much, our celebrity chairpersons, for conducting this session and making it most insightful one. And we are thanking all our celebrity faculties, dear Dr. Pai sir, Dr. Jaideep sir, and Dr. Kundan for your informative presentations with so many take-home messages for us. And I would just like to let you know that we had 6,500 plus registrations for this webinar series, and today 1,500 plus fertility and IVF experts are attending this right now on the working day at our OPD timings. So kudos to Team Foxy and all our staff faculties for today's session. And thank you all for staying with us till right up to the end and answering all these questions, so all your questions so patiently. And now I request Dr. Aruna to propose a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Rupal. We are extremely thankful to our President, Dr. Alpesh Gandhi sir, and Secretary General, Dr. Jaideep Tank sir, for planning such an excellent webinar and to give us a good knowledge and insight into this COVID-19 women's health. I thank our respectable chairpersons, Dr. Durusha ma'am and Dr. Reshma Pai ma'am. Thank you for the very good interaction and bringing a good practical points which will help us in clinical application and clinical practice. I also thank the expert speakers, Dr. Hrishikesh Pai sir, Dr. Jaideep Tank sir, Dr. Kundan Ingle for their thoughtful deliberations. Thank you so much. Thank you, Rupal, and thanks to MCure also for making it possible.
And one more
Thank you for having
announcement,
us.
one last announcement. You can download the attendance certificate to claim for your credit points by clicking on this Zoom link, and you will get your 2 credit point per day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Really
Thank
enjoyed
you,
everyone's
everybody.
presence.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay
you,
safe.
Dr. Alpesh.
See
Thank
all of you.
Deep.
Stay safe, everybody.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
sir.
Thank you
Bye.
very
Thank
much.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Present in over 70 countries, with 10,000 plus employees, 9 world-class manufacturing sites. Research-driven company with complex R&D capabilities. More than 500 qualified scientists. 13 chirally pure molecules. 5 biosimilar. First in India innovative products. MCure's mRNA vaccine phase 1 trials have started with funding from Department of Biotechnology, Government of India. MCure Corporate Initiatives. M Gurukul, India's first mentor-mentee program for doctors. Uncondition Yourself, first of a kind revolutionary talk show on women's health. M Vidya, a knowledge enhancement series for nurses and paramedics, in collaboration with Symbiosis College of Nursing, with 12,000 plus paramedics across 3,500 plus nursing homes. M Diva, MCure in association with RSSDI aims to promise better women healthcare in India. AnemiaFreeIndia.com, an initiative of FOGSI and MCure to spread awareness about anemia in India. Stroke Care App, an app towards stroke awareness for patients. BreastfeedingIsGood.com, an MCure initiative to promote breastfeeding awareness in India. At MCure, science wins.
When was the last time you heard women openly talk about their mental and physical health? Menstrual disorder, diabetes, pregnancy and breastfeeding, depression, cancer, infertility and safe abortion? Don't remember? Well, that's because the stigma attached to such conditions has forced women to bear the pain in silence. Dismal statistics on women's health need to change. A difference cannot be made until they voice their opinions, put forth their stories, and together bring about a healthy change. Presenting Uncondition Yourself, India's first of its kind revolutionary talk show dedicated to women's health. A platform where we talk about their health issues and breaking taboos. Catch Namita Thapar in conversation with leading doctors and patients sharing candid stories. It's time to speak up. Together we can raise awareness and create an impact. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for more such videos related to women's health.